Bonjour mes amis, bienvenue. Hello everyone and welcome. Je m'appelle Kimberly. My name is Kimberly and I want to talk to you about, whether or not you should cancel your trip to Paris or maybe postpone it, especially for those of you who might be traveling here towards the Christmas holiday or New Year's in light of the protests and riots that are going in Paris. So first and foremost, the number one thing is that only you can truly decide if canceling or postponing the trip. You have to assess your own risk level. But what I'm doing is I'm going to give you some resources and some information to help you make that best decision. So that's what I'm going to talk about here in this broadcast. So the first thing to remember is that the news is always going to show you the most sensational part of any kind of news broadcast. And of course, Paris being an iconic city of the world, the Champs-Élysées probably being one of the most famous streets in the world, the news is always going to be talking about what is going on in Paris, what is happening on the Champs-Élysées. And the protests have turned violent, they have turned destructive, but what the news is also not showing you are the peaceful demonstrations that are happening throughout France, as well as there are some other cities that are also having the same kind of, turn in protest to being more violent and destructive. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is that Paris is very big. So a lot of the protest, at least at this point, a lot of the protest, the violence and destruction has been happening in a fairly concentrated area along the Champs-Élysées. You're not really hearing about it in the 18th and the Montmartre area. So keep that in mind as you are assessing whether or not Paris is a place to visit right now or not to visit right now. Over on the ParisItinary.com, I actually have an article that I wrote about what to do when your itinerary doesn't go as planned. Now, when I wrote that actually happened to be more about something more joyful, and that was when France won the World Cup, and the people were lining the streets of the Champs-Élysées because they were celebrating a win. Now, of course, it's a little bit different situation. So it is a very serious situation, and I'm not going to go into the reasons for the yellow vest protest. That's actually not what I'm here for, but I do want to give you some resources and some tips and strategies so you can make the best decision on your upcoming trip to Paris. So I think that there are some really great resources you can follow that are news channels. Again, remember they tend to be a little more on the sensational side, but they will give you some guide. Two that I recommend are the France 24 English. You can get the French news in an English format. So for those of you who are Americans who are, trying to determine, France 24 English is a good resource. They have a YouTube channel, a Facebook page, and a Twitter account. The second one is the Local France. That's also another good resource to kind of just determine what is really happening. I think what's important when you are reading their articles is to look at the areas they're reporting from. Again, that is a little more concentrated on the Champs-Élysées. I'm going to go into a little bit about that here in a minute. It has started to spread out a little bit, but again, the Marais is not really seeing too much. Saint-Germain-des-Prés, I haven't heard of any protest in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés area. Nothing in Montmartre. So again, just keep that in mind as you are assessing whether or not you want to postpone your trip. I also think it's important that you follow some people who are living in Paris. Two that have been reporting on it that I follow on Instagram are David Leibowitz and also Lost in Cheeseland. Both of those are doing stories, Instagram stories, and kind of giving an update on kind of boots on the ground kind of situation where they are. David Leibowitz, I think, said it best, and that if you were visiting New York City and there was a protest on Wall Street, would that prevent you from visiting Manhattan? So that's a way to kind of look at it. I do think that it's important, and some things I'm going to tell you here in a second, I think happen whether or not it's in a situation like this where there are protests and some riots that are happening, but also just in general when you're planning a trip to Paris. Some of the things I'm going to talk to you about here I think are good ideas regardless, because you never know what can happen. I personally like to follow on Twitter some of the news. I think all those social media channels, typically you can find people all over the social media channels, but I think Twitter is probably one of the best in terms of monitoring the news. And I think it's also really nice because you can create lists and have people that you're following, and so you're not having to go through all your feed, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, and you can go and look in your list and follow very clearly and cleanly without going through, maybe hundreds of people you're following on Twitter. So even if you're not on Twitter, it might be something to consider when you're traveling, and there are a few places I think you should follow. In particular for Paris, I think Elodie's Paris is a great resource. She seems to always know what's happening way before anybody else. So that is a great person to follow. I would also follow all of the sites that you want to see. So for example, the Arc de Triomphe is closed at this moment until further notice. There's quite a bit of damage that was done to the Arc de Triomphe. So they are going to want to, of course, clean that up, as well as make repairs and make sure it's safe for visitors. So right now the Arc de Triomphe is shut down until further notice. But all the places, Notre Dame, the Eiffel Tower, probably all the main sites that you are going to visit have a Twitter feed. And again, I think they're up to date. They're telling you when things are closed, when they're open. And again, it's a good resource to follow, even if there weren't riots and protests happening, and they'll keep you up to date. So again, Elodie's Paris, any of the sites that you're seeing. Easy Travel Report is actually one I really like. He or they are up to date on strikes in general. They actually monitor many countries, but you can target France and, edit down and search for France, and they'll tell you all sorts of strikes and happenings that are going on because, strikes can happen anything. You can have a transportation strike or a worker strike. So just in general, again, outside of even the riots and the protests, they're a good resource to follow as for being up to date. The other thing I think it's always good to follow is the State Department. If you are from the United States, most of my followers are. The State Department, right now, they have a stage 2 level for France. I believe they've actually had that since the terrorist attacks on Nice. And basically that means just elevated caution. You can go to the State Department website and see that, but it's an elevated precaution or an elevated caution, meaning to be aware of surroundings. But I always follow the State Department. I think that's good. I also think the U.S. Embassy in France is a good one, although it's kind of hit and miss, but I think those are always good resources to follow. I'm actually going to publish a little more complete list later this week. So if you're interested in getting that, you can go over to the parisitinerary.com, go over to the side there and sign up for my email list. If you're not already on there, I'm going to publish something later this week with a list with all the links of the places that you can go to find information. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind if you decide to continue with your visit to Paris. Common sense. Number one, have common sense. Don't go to the Champs-Élysées. Basically, just avoid it right now, because not only is that tend to be where the protesters are gathering and going, either at the Arc de Triomphe or the Place de la Concorde. There's quite a bit of damage, lots of glass and debris and destruction, and businesses are needing to secure their places and clean up. So just don't go there. I mean, don't try to get that Instagram picture, that Facebook picture, that video. Let the professional journalists do that. They don't need you there. Avoid it. So one of the things to keep in mind is that in this past Saturday and Sunday's protest, it happened at the Arc de Triomphe, down the Champs-Élysées, which ends at the Place de la Concorde. Place de la Concorde is kind of the beginning of the Tuileries Gardens. There was actually someone who who is now in a coma because the big gigantic garden gates, the protesters brought it down and it hit someone, and they are now in a coma. So this is serious. So you do need to avoid this area. they did go into the Tuileries Gardens. And if you're looking at a map, basically there's a straight line that happens between the Arc de Triomphe down the Champs-Élysées, Place de la Concorde, that then goes into the Tuileries Gardens, which then leads to the Louvre. So it's kind of a straight line. The Musée Lingerie did have some damage. That is where Monet's water lilies, the museum with Monet's water lilies. Nothing to the artwork in there that I'm aware of, but glass, and there was an overturned car. So I would just avoid those areas. I'm not saying avoid the Louvre. I think you should follow the Louvre and see if they have any, difference in openings and times, etc. But just keep aware of all those sites. Again, why I recommend being on Twitter. One of the reasons I recommend Twitter is really for the list. And Facebook, it's a little bit harder. You have to go through your feed. Instagram is a totally different social media channel. But in Twitter, you can create those lists and very easily and quickly go there. So as far as the Christmas market, there was a Christmas market that was on the Champs-Élysées. It was going to be moved to the Tuileries Gardens this year anyway. I have not heard if they've shut down that Christmas market, if anything was destroyed or not. But there are plenty of Christmas markets around. There's one at Notre Dame and Les Halles and all over, actually. There's many. You can go to the Paris Visitors Bureau website, and they have a whole long list of all the places. So you don't have to miss out. There's one at Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Again, that's, to my knowledge, has seen no protests or riots. So there are Christmas markets. You can still go about many other parts of Paris without any issue. Of course, you never know when the riots or protesters might start, but right now it is in a concentrated area. I would avoid, like I said, the Champs-Élysées, Arc de Triomphe. I mean, there's no point. You're not going to get up. It's closed. Just avoid it. Place de la Concorde, Bastille is usually an area that protesters tend to gather around, so I'd be cautious going there. So there are a lot of different things to monitor. I think if you can look at these different resources, and again, follow some of the people on Instagram, like I said, Lost in Cheeseland, David Libowitz. He reported in the Marais there were a few banks that had some vandalism, but for the most part, he wasn't seeing anything, and that's the area he stays in. So all of this is to help you make the best decision. Again, I'm going to send out a comprehensive, or fairly comprehensive, it probably won't have everybody on it, of just some recommended, I don't think that's a word, recommendations on some things to follow so you can make the best assessment for you. I would say that if you are staying at an apartment or a hotel that is on the Champs-Élysées or anywhere within that, a block or two of that, go ahead and rebook somewhere else if you decide to stay and visit Paris. And then, of course, if you decide that you want to postpone it and visit at another time, of course, that's completely understandable. Again, you have to make the best assessment if this is a time for you to visit or not. So I think, I'm looking through my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think that's really it. One of the other things, I do have, like I said, an article over at theparisitinerary.com on what to do when your itinerary goes bust. Give some pretty good tips over there. I have a really great one that's a video at the very bottom, probably my best tip. But what to do when your itinerary goes bust. I like flexibility. If you've followed me for very long, I like flexibility in my itineraries for the very reason that you don't know when something like this would happen. And it may be joyful, like France winning the World Cup. It could be something a little more serious, as in the protests that unfortunately had been infiltrated with some extremists, and they have taken it to a new level. The other thing to also watch out, why I'm thinking of it, is that France may declare a state of an emergency. And if they do that, that will be very important to understand what that means. The last time they did this on the terrorist attacks in Nice, they did shut down and very much restricted people coming and leaving the country. So that could affect your plans anyway. So all of that is just some resources I hope that can help you make the best assessment for whether or not to continue your travels. I hope you would consider all of those resources, and then let me know in the comments if you plan to continue and go to Paris as planned, if you were going over Christmas or New Year's, or if you are deciding to postpone it or maybe cancel it, maybe visit another area. I'd like to know your comments on that, just to kind of see where you're going. So if you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them as best as I can. And again, be sure to sign up for the email over at theparisitinerary.com, because I am going to send out the list of resources as well as the links and suggestions for you to follow so you can make the best assessment for yourself. So thank you so much for watching. I will catch you all next time. Au revoir. Peace.